Relocating to this quaint small town felt like stepping back in time. The residents were friendly and welcoming, and the pace of life was significantly slower than the bustling city I'd left. I purchased a small house, secured a local job, and quickly adapted to the relaxed rural lifestyle. The community was a blend of longtime residents and newcomers, each with their own unique stories, and I soon became part of the social fabric, participating in local activities and developing close relationships. One of the most intriguing figures was an elderly gentleman who owned a substantial farm just down the road. After his children moved away, he eventually sold the property and retired to the southern states, leaving behind an estate that drew considerable interest from prospective buyers. While the farm stood empty after his departure, its silence sparked curiosity and conjecture among the locals. Eventually, it was purchased by new neighbors, rumored to be affluent and from up north. The property, encompassing a farmhouse, a barn, several outbuildings, and over 200 acres of rural land, had once flourished until the former owner, due to age, decided to sell, despite his children's apprehensions. I found the situation rather amusing, particularly when discussing it with a relative who shared my sentiment that the family's worries were overblown. One rainy evening, I encountered one of the new owner's daughters stranded by the roadside. Her luxury car was billowing steam, clearly experiencing engine trouble. When I pulled over to offer aid, she refused to unlock the door, visibly distressed. Since it was cold and pouring rain, I climbed a nearby hill to obtain cell service and contacted the local sheriff's department. The dispatcher, Aaron, immediately questioned my inaction. I explained the situation, but he retorted, "Get back there and do something. She's probably terrified." Grumbling about the rain and cold, I conceded, teasing him about sharing his leftover barbecue. Aaron chuckled and sweetened the deal with a promise of the choicest cuts, which grudgingly motivated me. 20 minutes later, Aaron and I returned to find her still in the car, clearly upset. Introducing himself, Aaron gently inquired if she needed assistance, to which she tearfully explained that her car had begun smoking and stalled, leaving her stranded with no means of communication. Aaron instructed her to allow me to examine the engine, explaining that I was proficient with cars, despite all the modern computerization. The diagnosis was swift: a ruptured radiator hose. I suggested contacting roadside assistance and offered to tow her car to my lot for safekeeping. However, she protested, frantic about her husband's potential reaction if she abandoned the vehicle. Aaron nudged me. "Why don't you haul it for her?" Despite the miserable weather, I agreed, assuring her the car would be secure on my property. The woman, who introduced herself as Mrs. Dixon, expressed her profound gratitude before Aaron offered her a ride home. An urgent call regarding an accident diverted Aaron, leaving me to escort Mrs. Dixon back to her residence. Upon arrival, the property was enveloped in darkness. She explained that the power was out, which I hadn't previously noticed. I inquired about flashlights or lanterns, but she admitted she had none. Recalling the generator the previous owner had installed, I investigated and found it still operational, though with only a few hours of fuel remaining. I advised her to procure diesel for future outages, providing her with my business card containing my number and the address of my lot. I reassured her about her car's safety and encouraged her to call if she needed anything before her husband's return. Grateful, she thanked me repeatedly before I departed. Later, I called my wife Flora to explain my tardiness. "Where have you been? Why didn't you call?" she demanded. Apologizing, I recounted the incident with the stranded car and the sheriff's request for my help. "I hope you charge them extra for making you work in this awful weather," she fumed. I assured her I'd be compensated, but I couldn't ignore her increasing preoccupation with money lately. A marked change from our earlier years. After securing the car and my trailer, I finally returned home, only to discover Flora had retired for the night, leaving a note indicating my dinner was in the microwave. I ate quickly, showered, and collapsed into bed, sleeping soundly until my alarm roused me the next day. The sunshine and warmth were a welcome contrast to the previous night's downpour. With little to do at the shop, I managed to repair Mrs. Dixon's car by midday. Around noon, a sharply dressed man in his 40s entered the office. "Nigel Dixon," he announced, extending his hand. "I need to arrange to have my wife's car towed. Who's the best mechanic in town?" My assistant Danny pointed at me. I smirked and approached. "Adam Reyes," I said, offering my hand. "Sorry, Mr. Dixon, we're not laughing at you, just the Dixon and Ferguson thing," Danny interjected. Dixon chuckled. "Well, I hope we won't be feuding. I left my shooting iron back in New York." I grinned and replied, "I melted mine into a plowshare. How can I help?" He explained his need for a tow, and I informed him the car was already repaired, requiring only a new hose and antifreeze. "Bring your wife by before 6, and she can drive it home," I added. Surprised, he inquired about the cost. $40. "The receipt's on the dashboard," I responded. "No, I meant for your labor," he clarified. I shook my head. "We don't charge for kindness around here. If you wanted to rent equipment, I'd charge. Or if I needed legal advice, you'd charge." He seemed perplexed by the small gesture, but nodded in appreciation. A bit later, he returned with his wife, who appeared younger and considerably more attractive than I had imagined. She expressed her gratitude repeatedly, until I light-heartedly told her to stop. "Call me Jill," she said, extending her hand with a warm smile. I introduced her to Danny, and the couple toured the shop, expressing admiration for the equipment and even our unusual event space, a large, circus-like tent frequently used for weddings. That evening, my wife Flora was agitated once more. She desired a new car to keep pace with neighbors like the Dixons and their Rolls-Royce. Her Hyundai Sonata, which she had insisted on purchasing 2 years prior, was now supposedly almost worn out, with just under 40,000 miles. "We can't keep up with everyone," I reminded her. "He's a lawyer. Your car is perfectly fine. If you disagree, go ahead and buy one yourself, but don't put my name on the paperwork." I knew her game. Flora's credit was a disaster, riddled with defaults on car loans and credit cards from before our marriage. I had assisted her with a car purchase once, but refused to settle her credit card debts. "I don't believe in credit cards," I stated flatly, whenever the subject arose. "They're traps," she would retort. "But you have two, don't you?" I would explain that they were for business, one for essential expenses, and the other used infrequently to maintain its activity. Knowing this, I had her sign a prenuptial agreement to safeguard my assets, including the shop and the house my parents had left me when they relocated to California. I had established my business from the ground up, commencing with subcontract work before reinvesting every penny into equipment for 3 years. By the 4th year, I'd repaid my parents for the house. I was proud of my accomplishments and had no desire to jeopardize them. Flora and I had met at a contractor's Christmas party, where she had accompanied another man. We danced, and sparks ignited. As I was departing, the hostess slipped me Flora's number, suggesting I call her before kissing me on the cheek. A week before Christmas, she appeared at my shop and presented me with an unusual slip of paper. It was a mock rental agreement that read, "Male, good-looking chaperone for a Christmas party. 5 hours. Pleasant conversationalist. Good dancing skills. Kissing skills determined. Willing to be trained. Delivery to specified address." Amused, I agreed, and we grabbed coffee before the party. My assistant, Lisa, insisted I purchase a new suit, so we went shopping, with her husband in tow. After trying on what felt like 100 suits, Lisa declared we'd found the one, complete with a matching shirt, tie, socks, and shoes. "You're not picking out my underwear too, are you?" I quipped. Lisa grinned. "Dark blue silk boxers. You want to feel as good as you look." I rolled my eyes but went along with it, knowing there was no arguing with her. On the night of the party, I rented a Rolls-Royce and picked up Flora, who looked breathtaking in a shimmering green dress with a high slit and a plunging neckline secured with double-sided tape. Despite the daring attire, she carried herself with elegance and became the focal point of the event. She was gracious, even when politely declining overly enthusiastic dance partners. During a slow dance, she took my hand and whispered, "No more slow dancing with anyone but you," leaving a particularly clingy man standing awkwardly on the dance floor. On the drive home, she snuggled close, nibbling my ear at every stoplight, making us the target of honking cars. When we finally arrived at her house, the windows of my car were thoroughly fogged. After 20 minutes of kissing, she invited me in for coffee. I sat on the couch, fighting off sleep, when I heard someone clear their throat. Apparently, when she said she was getting out of the dress, she meant entirely. I stood speechless for a moment, and she became visibly uneasy. "Here's the thing," she began. "I like you a lot. Normally, I'd send you home tonight, and we'd date a dozen times before a big night with candles, music, maybe some whipped cream and chocolate. But I really like you, so let's say we skip a few months and test out my mattress." That plan didn't quite hold. After 12 hours, I only left her place to grab breakfast. Otherwise, the Escalade remained parked for 2 full days. 2 months later, we moved in together, and 5 months after that, we were married. At the time, she was 25, and I was 29. We planned to enjoy a few years as a couple before starting a family, but things didn't progress as smoothly as I'd hoped. 3 years passed, and I began dropping hints about having children. Around the same time, she started acting more demanding and materialistic. First, she decided we needed a new house, despite ours having 4 bedrooms. Then, she maxed out a credit card. When I paid it off and revoked her access, she didn't speak to me for 2 days. Despite earning a decent salary herself, she was perpetually broke. Her closet overflowed with clothes that still had tags and stacks of unworn shoes. After the car incident, her silence extended to 5 days. On the 6th day, she returned home to find me emptying her closet. She stood there, observing silently, as I packed her belongings into suitcases. I turned to her and said, "I'm not living like this anymore. If I'm going to live alone, I'd rather actually live alone." Then I added, "I called your mother. She's agreed to let you stay with her for 2 weeks. By then, we'll find you a place. I'll cover the deposit, the first 2 months' rent, and set up the utilities. You need to learn how to budget and live on your own." She fainted. I caught her, laid her on the floor, and wiped her face with a cool cloth. I applied a cold cloth to her forehead until she regained consciousness. Looking at me, she murmured, "Adam, I had the oddest dream. You were throwing me out, but I can't recall why." Then her eyes fell on the packed suitcases, and she burst into tears, begging for another opportunity. I let her cry for a while before asking her to compose herself and join me in the kitchen. Once there, I explained everything. "I'm serious," I stated. "This can't go on." The outbursts, the extravagant spending, the refusal to even discuss starting a family. "I don't recognize you anymore. If you want to leave, just say so. If not, things need to change drastically." She finally confessed her deep-seated fear of motherhood, stemming from a difficult childhood. "I was the middle of 3, she explained. "When my parents split, it devastated me. I can still picture my mom crying alone with 3 teenagers. She started drinking and neglecting us. My dad moved across the country. I don't want to put a child through that." Taking her hand, I reassured her, "Darling, I'm so sorry you experienced that. But I'm not talking about a full house, just one. And if we decide to have another, we'll wait at least 2 years. I'll never leave you, I promise." For the next 3 weeks, we mostly avoided each other. But gradually, the relationship started to heal. She curbed her spending, opened a savings account, and 3 months later, proudly showed me the balance. I was astonished. "Don't get too excited," she cautioned. "It'll be empty soon." Expecting her to announce plans for a new vehicle, I was speechless when she revealed her true intention. "I'm buying furniture for the nursery. You'll need to start painting soon," she said, smiling in a way that signaled my world had just been flipped on its head. It turned out we were having a son. She'd stopped taking her birth control pills to surprise me, and it worked. When I cried in my office after hearing the news, it startled her. "Did I make a mistake?" "I thought this is what you wanted," she started, but I silenced her with a kiss. My assistant, Lisa, immediately picked up on something. "What's going on with you two? You look like someone slapped you, and you both liked it," she teased. I told her to keep it under wraps, but I knew the whole town would know by lunchtime. Sure enough, by the time we returned, a banner hung over the shop counter. "Congrats, Adam and Flora. It's a boy. The pregnancy wasn't easy. By 7 months, Flora was on bed rest, and her mother moved in to assist. Labor was protracted, 17 hours, and culminated in a C-section. Exhausted, Flora declared, "Never again." I concurred, and she had her tubes tied before we were discharged. He was born a healthy 9 pounds, with a thick head of black hair, just like mine. The nurse joked it might change, but it never did. Parenthood transformed everything. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. Life wasn't about us anymore. Every plan, even a grocery run, revolved around him. Flora struggled with motherhood more than I anticipated. She adored Ellen, but handed him to me the instant I walked in the door, calling it her baby recovery time. I didn't mind. Ellen never cried with me, which sometimes frustrated her. If he was wailing when I arrived, he'd calm down the moment I picked him up. My bond with the Dixons strengthened as well. One weekend, Jill asked to rent a tractor for her garden. I declined, explaining, "Tractors can be hazardous if you're not familiar with their operation. I don't want that on my conscience." "You've got everything you need already. Mr. Anderson's tractor should do the trick." When she mentioned it wouldn't start, I offered to take a look. She protested about pulling me away from my family, but I assured her, "They'll come with me." That Saturday, Flora and Ellen joined me at the Dixons. Jill doted on Ellen, holding him the entire time, while Flora grew increasingly irritated. I got the tractor battery charging while Nigel and I discussed their gardening plans. Later, I gave Jill her first tractor lesson. I showed her the basics: throttle, brakes, hydraulics, and gears, emphasizing the importance of safety. She practiced driving in low gear while I walked alongside, providing guidance. By the time we left, she was beaming, and Nigel had snapped a dozen photos. Flora and I enjoyed our time with the Dixons, but I couldn't help but notice her fascination with the artwork in their house. Later, I caught her looking up the value of some of the paintings, realizing they were worth thousands. Still, Flora returned to work shortly after, finding it unbearable to stay home all day. Meanwhile, Jill started a popular blog about her rural adventures, humorously documenting everything from tending her garden to mucking out stalls in what she called her crap uniform. She was resourceful and tenacious, and it was easy to understand Nigel's adoration for her. Our friendship deepened over time. One day, Nigel asked if Flora and I could assist with a southern barbecue he was organizing for a business meeting. I agreed, eager to cook again. Jill was coordinating every detail, but I suggested inviting families instead of keeping it strictly business. A personal call to each guest will make a stronger impact than a generic invitation, I advised. She relayed the idea to Nigel, who readily agreed. As we prepped, Jill looked at me with a grin. "Have you ever considered running for office? You'd win with the barbecue vote." I laughed. "Nah, just been to a lot of parties. You learn as you go." Jill took charge of the guest list, and before we knew it, the event ballooned from 100 to nearly 300 attendees. We hired 3 local girls to help serve, and Flora, Lisa, and Danny pitched in to keep everything running smoothly. The day couldn't have been better. Hot, but bearable with a refreshing breeze. We set up a large dining tent, installed fans, and got to work. The menu was extensive: 400 pounds of pork, 20 chickens, and 2 beef briskets labeled as kosher for some of the Jewish attendees. Side dishes ranged from potato salad and baked beans to zucchini casserole and grilled vegetables, much of it sourced directly from Jill's garden. For dessert, we had homemade cakes, brownies, and chilled watermelon for the children. By the time the event concluded, I was utterly exhausted, but the effort was worthwhile. We'd invited 300 people, but with children included, 420 showed up. Before dinner, guests mingled, enjoying the relaxed atmosphere. We had a no-alcohol policy for the dining area, but an open bar was set up under a small marquee, only opening an hour after dinner. Senior partners from Nigel's firm made it clear that excessive drinking wouldn't be tolerated. Meanwhile, children played games and ran around, while Jill and Nigel circulated smoothly among the various groups. The men discussed business, The women chatted about their families, and soft furniture under the trees provided a welcome respite. I couldn't help but admire Flora, radiant in her conservative sundress, smiling and accepting compliments on our food. Near the evening's end, we gathered everyone under the dining tent for a brief address. I set up the small PA system, and the senior partner stepped up to thank the guests, commending Jill, Nigel, Flora, and myself for making the event a success. To everyone's surprise, he kept his remarks concise, concluding with, "Let's not ruin this perfect day. Grab some food to take home, and don't forget the ice cream." The crowd gave him a standing ovation before rushing to the ice cream machines. Flavors like chocolate, banana, pineapple, blueberry, and vanilla had both children and adults eating too quickly, leaving many groaning with ice cream headaches. Jill's garden tours were also a big hit. She picked ripe tomatoes and beans to share, and the chilled watermelons from her garden were the undisputed champions of the seed-spitting contest. After the event, Flora nearly swooned when Jill handed her the check. The gathering had evolved into a full-fledged corporate event, so Nigel's firm covered the expenses. Moreover, there was an additional check with a 25% bonus and a handwritten note from the senior partner expressing his gratitude. I divided the extra money among Danny, Lisa, and the girls we'd hired, then gave the remainder to Flora. She had earned it. Nigel's firm specialized in business law, and the event opened the door to more party requests. Soon, the demand became so great that we registered it as a separate business. Flora left her job to manage it full-time, excelling in her role and becoming noticeably more self-assured. I promoted Lisa to rental manager, and she hired her husband, who had recently been laid off. Everything seemed to be falling into place, though Flora relished every opportunity to remind me that she was now the boss, both at work and at home. "It's your fault, Adam. Get over it," she'd tease. "How many men get to entertain their boss at the end of the day?" Flora began dressing more professionally and sometimes had evening meetings with clients. Saturdays became filled with events and planning. While she handled the logistics, I concentrated on equipment, staff, and food preparation. The business prospered, but we started spending less and less time together. The breaking point came after she scheduled 3 consecutive late Saturday meetings. Frustrated, I snapped, "I'm not cooking, coordinating, or helping at all if you schedule another late meeting," I warned her. "I thought this was a partnership," she retorted. "I care more about our husband-wife partnership. What's more important, the business or us?" The following month, she scheduled a Sunday meeting anyway. True to my word, I refused to help, and the event was a disaster. Disappointed clients made it clear they weren't satisfied. That evening, as I was feeding Ellen, she came into the kitchen waving a white handkerchief. "No," I said firmly, before she could utter a word. Her eyes widened. "I want full surrender. Meet my conditions, or this is over. No negotiations." Picking up Ellen, I added, "I'm taking him to Nigel and Jill's for a bit. We'll be back in an hour." Ellen adored Jill, and she loved him like her own. He had just started walking and would rush to her as soon as I set him down. Jill often babysat for us, and one of Ellen's first words was "Jill," which brought her to tears. That evening, Nigel asked me about an old race car sitting in one of their barns. "It belonged to the previous owner. The engine's blown, though," I explained. "Can it be rebuilt?" Nigel inquired, excitement in his voice. "Sure, but why?" I asked, curious. "I've always dreamed of driving a race car," he admitted. "This would be perfect." After some persuasion, Jill agreed to let him give it a shot. We rebuilt the engine, and Nigel took lessons from local racers. Soon he was racing every Friday night at the dirt track. One evening, Flora and I went to watch. The atmosphere was loud and chaotic, but Nigel seemed to be in his element. Midway through the race, however, he pulled into the pits, exhausted from battling the flu in the summer heat. Danny, part of his pit crew, suggested, "You know, he can have a substitute if he's sick." Both Danny and I turned to Jill. "Oh no, I don't know anything about racing," she protested. "You don't have to race," Danny reassured her. "Just keep the car moving. Shift gears, stay behind the group, and finish the laps. Nigel will still get credit and save his points." Reluctantly, she agreed. As we buckled her into the seat, she asked nervously, "What if I crash?" I tried to comfort her. "The cage will protect you. Just stay steady and low, and they'll leave you alone." She hesitated for a moment, then hit the gas, scattering gravel as she joined the track. For the first 15 laps, she kept to herself, avoiding any trouble. Then, one racer, determined to improve his standings, began targeting her car. On the headset, we heard her shout, "What the hell is he doing?" I advised her to brake hard and accelerate quickly when he got close. "He'll hit your bumper, but he won't have enough speed to do serious damage." She followed the advice perfectly, leaving the racer tangled in traffic. However, during the next pass, he slammed her into the wall. Jill pulled into the pits. The fender crumpled. "Can you fix it?" she asked urgently. We could have pulled out the dented fender, but there wasn't enough time. Jill, however, was fired up. "Rip it off and get me back in. I'm going to run this guy into the wall," she said with determination. Danny yanked at the damaged wing while I buckled her in again. "Don't do anything reckless," I warned. "Watch him. He'll come for you again." "Clear!" Danny shouted as Jill hit the gas, roaring back onto the track. She drove like she was in a stolen Maserati, weaving around the other cars with precision. Seeing the troublemaker lining her up again, I yelled into her headset, "Cut left now!" Jill swerved to the top of the track, catching him off guard. He slammed into another car, causing chaos behind her. When the caution lifted, Jill found herself in third place. By the end of the race, despite the lost laps, she managed to finish 7th. The guy who tried to ram her came in dead last, dropping further behind Nigel in points. When Jill climbed out of the car, she pulled off her helmet and grinned. "How does it feel to lose to a girl?" she teased, patting her rear before dissolving into laughter and hugging Nigel. The driver looked furious, but I stepped in. "Be polite," I told him firmly. "She beat you fair and square. Learn from it." His crew, ready for a fight, held back as he turned and walked away. Jill was hooked. Using her trust fund, she bought her own car and started racing in the women's division. Though she joined late in the season, she managed to win 2 races. Nigel finally got his trophy, and they began planning for the next year, painting both cars with their firm's logo and ours. It was a recreational dirt track, the kind where many successful racers got their start. For Nigel and Jill, it was a shared passion that brought them closer. Flora and I, on the other hand, shared little in common anymore, except for Ellen. Our business was growing, with 2 crews now operating full-time. Flora dressed sharper, carried herself more confidently, and started spending less time with Ellen and me. She joined a professional women's organization and began attending mixers every 2 weeks. When she won an award, I was proud, but at the banquet, something felt off. When I was introduced as her husband, several of her colleagues looked surprised, almost uneasy. "That was strange," I remarked later. "Some of your friends seemed shocked when I was introduced." "Do you have a city husband I don't know about?" I joked. Flora's face flushed. "No, honey," she said quickly. "They were just surprised I didn't make you up. You should come to mixers with me more often so I can show you off." Her explanation seemed reasonable, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. As fall arrived and business slowed, we returned to working with just our core crew. Nigel's boss called, asking me to cook for a small party celebrating Nigel's birthday and his racing achievements. I want to show appreciation and let Nigel brag about his racing. "You're his best friend outside of work, so I couldn't hire anyone else without offending you," he explained. "How many people?" I asked. "About 40, just friends. We'd love for you to cook, but not as a professional, just as a friend." I agreed, but kept it simple. "I'll handle the meat, pork, chicken, and kielbasa. Have the wives prepare desserts and sides. Nigel will appreciate that more." When I told Flora about the date, she frowned. "I have an event that day. We've signed a contract. I can't miss it," she said, irritated. I replied, "These are friends. If they hadn't trusted us to throw that first party, we wouldn't have this business. It would be insulting if you didn't show up. Just check in at your event. make sure everything's running smoothly, and come back. Think of Jill and Nigel. On the day of the party, Flora called, saying she was stuck at work but would be back in an hour. We were running low on ice, so I volunteered to grab some from home. Taking Nigel's car, I ran out of gas halfway there. Walking back through the woods, I caught a glimpse through my patio door blinds. Inside, a couple was entangled on the couch. Assuming it was a neighborhood kid, I was about to call the authorities until I realized it was Flora and one of Nigel's younger employees. Rage surged through me. My first impulse was to burst in and confront them, but I remembered Nigel's advice as a former divorce attorney. Reacting violently to infidelity only weakens your position. Shaking with anger, I called Nigel. "What's taking so long?" he asked. "Do I need to send Jill?" I replied, "Actually, I need Jill. It's an emergency." When Jill got on the line, I explained, "I saw Flora with someone else. I need a witness and a good divorce lawyer." Jill's voice was steady. "Stay there. We'll come to you." 20 minutes later, Jill, Nigel, and two of their friends arrived. One of the women, Nora, was a divorce lawyer I knew socially. "Do you have proof?" she asked. I showed her the photos I'd taken on my phone. "Adam, the hardest thing you can do now is stay calm. Don't engage them. Let me handle it. It will give you the upper hand." Nigel called his senior partner, who pulled into my driveway pretending to fetch ice as Flora and her lover scrambled to gather their clothes. The senior partner loudly announced, "Flora, are you here? Adam sent me for ice. We're out." When she didn't respond, he unlocked the door, giving her no time to hide. The lover bolted to the deck, half-dressed, while Flora emerged from the house, red-faced and panicked. The senior partner raised a hand. "Not a word. Be in my office Monday at 9 a.m., he commanded, walking away without another glance. Nora handed me her card and instructed me to meet her at her office Monday afternoon. "We'll strategize. Remember, control yourself and don't let this turn into a war," she advised. Jill hugged me tightly. "Think of Ellen," she whispered. That night, I avoided the house and stayed in Nigel and Jill's guest room. I couldn't sleep, but the sight of Ellen smearing syrup on Jill's face at breakfast the next morning brought a small smile to my face. Later that afternoon, we had our first strategy meeting. "Divorce?" Jill asked. "Yes," I replied. "We've grown apart. She wants the big city. I'm a country boy. My roots are here." Jill pressed, "What about Ellen?" I answered firmly, "I want custody. I don't think a child fits into her lifestyle." Nigel observed, "He doesn't, but she'll use custody as leverage for a larger settlement." Nora nodded. "We need to avoid turning this into a battle. Keep your emotions in check." I didn't see Flora for 6 days. When I returned home, there she was. It took everything in me not to throw her out on the spot. She saw the fury in my eyes and stepped back, her voice shaky. "Please, just let me grab my things and see Ellen for a little while. Then I'll leave quietly. You can even take my car keys." Reluctantly, I let her play with Ellen, though he seemed uninterested. She'd been so detached from him that he hardly cared. She asked for her car keys to open the trunk and suggested I help her with her clothes. I followed her outside. When she started the car, I yanked the keys out of the ignition and hurled them onto the driveway. She screamed as I pulled Ellen out of his car seat. "He's mine, and you can't take him," she yelled. Ellen cried, confused and scared, while Flora hurled insults until she noticed Jill nearby, filming everything with her phone. Jill pulled up on her four-wheeler, cradling Ellen to soothe him, while keeping her voice calm but firm. "Flora, leave now. If you want to see Ellen, get court permission. Now go, before I call the police." Flora hesitated, still screaming, but Jill didn't back down. Every word was captured on video. When Flora finally stomped off, Jill came over to check on me. "You okay?" she asked softly. I nodded, my focus on calming Ellen. The next day, I handed the footage to Nora, who promptly filed for an injunction requiring Flora to undergo a psychiatric evaluation before she could see Ellen again. Flora had moved in with her lover, who, unsurprisingly, had been fired over their affair. Though his former employers used polite terms, the message was clear. No references. He took a lower-paying job elsewhere. I sent a letter to our clients informing them I was no longer actively involved in the business, but would honor all existing contracts. Flora assumed control of the party and catering operations, but I considered stepping away entirely. Nora advised against it. "You have a stellar reputation," she explained. "You might want to return to this later. Plus, it provides Flora with income, which could work in your favor." Negotiations began, and Flora made her demands. She wanted the house, but it was still in my parents' name. She wanted the equipment, but as per our prenuptial agreement, it was owned by my company, and she couldn't afford it. Nora froze most of our accounts, allowing money only for payroll and supplies. Profits went into an account Flora controlled, ensuring fairness. Though she struggled, Nora and her lawyer eventually convinced her to accept the deal. Flora attempted one last meeting to air her grievances, but I refused. By then, she'd dated 5 men in 18 months. Slick city types, most of them broke. I kept my composure for Ellen's sake, who had just turned 3 and barely noticed her absence. Flora ended up with the business, giving me 1/4 of the profits. I retained full custody of Ellen, while Flora had limited visitation rights with strict conditions. No men around Ellen, and any violation would cut off contact entirely. Jill and Nigel became my rocks during this time, helping me cope with the anger and loss. Jill, with Nigel's full support, took on a maternal role for Ellen. In fact, Nigel kept a photo of himself, Jill, and Ellen on his desk, letting clients assume Ellen was his stepson. It worked well for his image as a family man. I surprised them both by naming them as Ellen's guardians in my will. "You're a family man, Nigel. You always have been. You and Jill are the closest thing Ellen has to extended family." Seeing Nigel, a tough lawyer, tear up was a moment I won't forget. One day, Nigel's senior partner asked me to escort his recently divorced daughter, Isabella, to a charity banquet. "She's beautiful, if that helps," he added with a wink. I agreed and rented a Rolls-Royce for the occasion. Isabella was stunning, petite, blonde, with a radiant smile. Her personality was just as charming. "A real-life redneck," she teased. "Do you bite?" I grinned. "Yes," I replied seriously, making everyone at the table laugh, setting the tone for the evening. The event was prestigious, and Isabella, while delightful, admitted she talked non-stop when nervous. "Do you ever stop?" I joked. "Only when I have something interesting in my mouth," she quipped, making Nigel choke on his coffee while Jill giggled. Isabella was a wonderful dance partner, and though she danced with her father and Nigel most of the evening, she was by my side while waiting. Near the bandstand, I spotted Flora approaching with her escort. "Larry, Holly, Adam, good to see you," she said, her voice strained. "Let me introduce you to Larry Holly. You might recognize his father, the founder of Holly Bank." She looked worn, having gained weight, and her companion seemed utterly uninterested in the conversation. Isabella, catching the tension, leaned in and kissed my cheek. "Do you miss me, love?" she teased. "Good. I want you to be upset all night. It'll make our passionate love even crazier later." Turning to Flora and her date, Isabella smiled innocently. "Oh, I'm sorry. Who are your friends?" Feigning politeness, I replied, "This is Larry Holly of Holly Bank, and Flora Hicks, a local businesswoman and my ex-wife." Then, introducing Isabella, I added, "And this is Isabella Hughes of Hughes, Howe, and Dixon. Shall we dance?" Taking Isabella's hand, I led her to the dance floor, leaving Flora and Larry speechless. As we waltzed, Isabella whispered, "Jill told me everything, didn't she?" I smiled. "She did." Isabella snuggled closer. "Don't worry about her. It looks like they're having a rough time." When the dance ended, Isabella pulled me into a deep kiss. "Did she see that?" I asked. "Oh, she saw it," Isabella replied smugly. "You're welcome." Later, Larry asked Isabella to dance, and Flora approached me hesitantly. Just for old time's sake? She asked. I'd love to, but I promised my lover all my dances, I said with a smirk. Sorry, Flora. Maybe next time. The stunned look on her face was priceless, and as Jill stifled a laugh, Flora and Larry left without a word. Later I glanced at Isabella. I'm glad you're not staying here permanently, I said teasingly. Her face fell. Why would you say that? I'm starting to like you, I explained, smiling. Because we'd always be fighting off other people. I'd have to keep men away from you, and you'd be busy keeping women away from me. She grinned mischievously. What makes you think I'd resist? She didn't, and we spent every spare minute together after that. Jill refused to let Ellen go for a weekend, so Isabella and I could have time alone, but it didn't matter. Isabella turned out to be the best lover I'd ever had, strong, supple, and endlessly surprising. Though she never shared her age, I guessed she was in her 40s. She adored Ellen, showing me pictures of her own daughter, who looked to be about 13. My ex has her now, she said wistfully. I gave him more time with her because soon we'll be 3,000 miles apart. The thought of Ellen being far from me someday made my chest tighten. To stay occupied, I opened a barbecue restaurant. Lisa handled the rentals so well that I left her to it while focusing on the new venture. Running a restaurant was time-consuming and risky, but it paid off. I expanded into food trucks, sending them to nearby towns 4 days a week, and they became a hit. Despite my professional success, my personal life lacked permanence, and I had given up looking for anything serious. Tragedy struck when Ellen was 9. Every afternoon, he'd get off the bus at Jill's house and ride his four-wheeler through the woods. Jill would wave at me as I came home, and they'd walk together to her house for snacks and schoolwork before heading back to ours. On rare occasions, he'd stay overnight. Jill had even set up a room for him. One day, Ellen called me crying. "Come quick, Daddy! Jill's on the floor and I can't get her up." I raced over to find Jill, lying on the floor, sobbing and unresponsive. As I was about to call emergency services, my phone rang. It was Nigel's boss. "Adam, I need you to check on Jill," he said, his voice heavy. Nigel had a heart attack. He died instantly. We found him in his office. My phone nearly slipped from my hand. Nigel was gone. My best friend, and Jill's world. I cradled her on the couch, rocking her like a child as we cried together. Nigel's will requested cremation, and for his ashes to be scattered around the farm. "This is the only place I ever felt at home," he'd written. At the funeral, an incredible mix of people gathered. Clients, racers, firm members. Even Flora showed up, hugging Jill during visitation while Ellen sat on her lap. Flora's mother, who had grown close to Jill through Ellen, stayed nearby. Jill's eyes followed me around the room, as if she'd lose her footing if I left her sight. Nigel's death hit everyone hard. He was only 52, and though he seemed healthy, doctors suspected an undetected condition. After the funeral, friends and family went back to their routines, leaving Jill to grieve. Ellen, Flora's mom, and I stayed with her for 2 weeks to help her through it. She began to recover by the second week, though reading Nigel's will made everything final. He'd left letters for his loved ones, one for Jill, one for Ellen to open when he turned 18, and one for me. The letter read, "Dear Adam, if you're reading this, it means I'm gone. Thank you for your friendship. You made me a better person, able to appreciate life. It was an honor to know you. I've set up a college fund for Ellen. I know you can afford it, but it was my pleasure. He's a great kid and will grow into an even better man with your guidance. Please take care of Jill. She'll need you. I know you've loved her. Don't ever hurt her. She'll need your love to get through the dark times ahead. I'm sorry I won't be around to see Ellen grow up. Find someone before you give up." Most of Nigel's possessions, including the farm and investments, went to Jill. He left funds to the racetrack he loved, which was renamed in his honor. Jill tried to move on, but a year later she decided to leave. "I can't stay here, Adam. Everywhere I look, I see his ghost," she said, tears streaming. Ellen cried for 2 days, and I quietly shed my own tears. Jill had been my anchor for years. She handed us the keys to the farm and asked us to care for it. I visited often to maintain the property, but it wasn't the same. Ellen began socializing more, and our home became a hub for his friends. I made it a point to know their parents, inviting them over regularly. I dated a few divorced moms casually, but nothing serious. Meanwhile, my businesses thrived. I opened more restaurants and expanded my rental equipment services. Flora's business, on the other hand, declined without my favorable rental deals. Her chef quit, and she eventually closed. She became an office manager at an insurance firm, married a lawyer, and divorced within 18 months due to infidelity. She still saw Ellen on holidays and birthdays, but they had little connection. One evening, exhausted from opening a new restaurant, I walked into the house to see Ellen and Ma grinning. "What's going on?" I asked, glancing down to make sure my fly was zipped. "We have a visitor," Ma said, motioning to the door. It was Jill. She ran into my arms crying. We'd kept in touch, but I'd always encouraged her to come home. "How long are you staying?" I asked. "Another 30 or 40 years, she replied. "I'm home, Adam. I'm tired of city life. I want to see stars instead of smog. I want to see you and Ellen every day." Tears filled her eyes, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt a deep sense of happiness. We helped her settle back into her house. She looked worn and out of shape, but within weeks the farm began to restore her. She got stronger, her youth returning as she tended her garden and rode the tractor. Ellen split his time between her house and ours. A few months later, Jill and I started dating. We went to movies, concerts, and even danced occasionally. Despite her insistence that we were just friends, everything fell into place. One chilly evening, as we sat on the porch swing under a blanket, watching Ellen and his friends on their four-wheelers, I stopped swaying and looked into her eyes. "Marry me," I said. "What?" she replied, startled. "Marry me. I've loved you for years. You love me too, even if you won't admit it. Let's stop playing musical houses and settle down." Tears welled in her eyes. "But our age," she began. "I know you're 50 and I'm 43. I don't care. I love you, and I'll love you until the day I die." When she hesitated, I added, "This is an ultimatum. Marry me, or I swear, on Nigel's memory, I'll never set foot on this farm again. Yes or no, right now." She said nothing, and I turned to leave. Before I could reach the porch, she grabbed me, and we tumbled down the steps. Ellen rushed over. "Jill, are you okay?" he asked, worried. Smiling through her tears, she replied, "Yes, dear. I just got some good news. Soon, I'll officially be your mom. I hope that makes you happy." Ellen grinned. "You've pretty much always been my mom. Now I can say it out loud. I love you, Mom." Our wedding, held in the spring in a meadow on the farm, became the talk of the town. Lisa outdid herself, and Nigel's old friends from the firm came, including Isabella. She kissed Jill and told her how lucky she was. The racers at the track restored Jill's car and gifted it to her as a wedding present. Years flew by in happiness. Ellen graduated from college, got married, and started a business with his wife. We gave them my old house as a wedding gift, remodeling it beforehand. They gave us 3 beautiful grandchildren, and Ellen named his son Nigel. On our 50th wedding anniversary, I presented Jill with an oil portrait of Nigel by a renowned artist. She cried for 2 hours before we hung it above the fireplace. Some evenings, as Jill played with our youngest granddaughter by the fire, I'd glance at the portrait and swear Nigel was smiling.